Welcome, everybody. I know a few of you are on early. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to let people take a moment to join while you're joining. Please answer the poll if you get a moment, because we have an incredible variety of people joining this. And it would be lovely if you would put in the chat your name and maybe your state or region. We also have quite an extraordinary array of people geographically from all over the country. So welcome. I know we're still about a minute before the official time. Um, and still a little early, and people, wow, we already have 35, 36 people on. Welcome, Maryland and Mississippi. We're starting with the M states. Virginia, welcome. New Jersey, thank you for being here. This is great. Welcome. Um, just for anybody joining now, please let us know on the poll a little bit about who you are. And if you have a moment, put your name and where you're from into the chat. We have an amazing group of people joining us today. Let's see. Welcome to everybody. For those just joining now, we're adding people, having people offer where they're from, and they're in the chat, and offer us, tell us a little about who you are in the poll. Welcome to everybody. We have a great group. Please, if you're just joining now, add where you're coming from if you get a chance in the chat, and fill in the poll to let us know where you're coming, to let us know what brings you, what work you do. Thank you so much. Okay. Oh, this is great. What an amazing array of people we have on this call. I'm going to give just a few more minutes. We still have people joining constantly. So I'm going to ask as people join, please put your name and where you're from into the chat and fill in the poll so we know a little bit more about who's joining. Let's see. This is great. This is an amazing array of people. Give just a minute or so more and then try to get started. I know we're fixing one audio challenge on the panel, and hoping we'll have that fixed in just a moment. Okay. I think we're getting there. We still have people joining. We still have people joining. I'm going to give about one more minute and then start the conversation. Um, Let me just see if we've got, I know we still have people rapidly joining. I think maybe we can share the results of the poll in terms of who's on so far, knowing there will be lots more people. Why don't we share that and then we'll welcome everybody and get started. Okay. We able to see the poll? All right. So we have researchers and policy analysts, an elected or appointed official, public service, direct service providers, advocates, and I want to note from the chat from all over the country, educators, philanthropy, nonprofit, student, extremely broad array of people. Well, welcome to everybody for joining. We still have a lot of people joining, but I'm going to get started given our amazing panelists. It is so amazing to have so many people here. We had over 350 RSVPs and people are still joining now. All regions of the country, as you can see from the chat, and that whole range of different roles that we talked about: funders, researchers, advocates, national, state, local government, parent and labor organizers, researchers, all kinds of backgrounds. When I think about why we had that amazing turnout, um, with everything going on at a time of year when everyone's personal and holiday commitments, as well as your work commitments right now, are overwhelming. I think there are three reasons for such an amazing turnout. And I would say the first of those is, of course, the incredible panel, who I'm going to introduce in a moment. But can you just wave? I just want people to see what an amazing group of people it is. And that's the biggest reason for this turnout. Second reason, I'm going to take a little bit of credit for our amazing CLASP team. I do think some people who are joining know us and know our work, and that's a reason you wanted to come. And then the third reason, of course, is the incredibly important topic, forging a path forward, or more specifically, insights from four amazing leaders on how they see the path forward on racial, economic, and immigrant justice. And I just want to say that we planned this event before the election, believing it would be relevant either way. And we did get a few signups then. But I think its relevance has just gotten even greater since the election, because we just all need to hear from four reflective and wise and committed leaders on how to move the agenda forward. I'm hoping that the conversation will achieve four goals. I know this may be a little bit ambitious. I'm hoping, and in fact, I'm sure, given this panel, that it will be reflective, that will draw out some insights that will be new to some of us and help us think about what's going on in our lives. At the same time, I also am hoping for practical, to take the big ideas into some very specific recommendations. Um, and then besides reflective and practical, I'm aiming for honest, meaning I think there will be some of the big ideas we're going to raise that are hard to do. And this is a group of people with a lot of experience in, It's hard to build the right kind of coalition, and what does it take to do it? So I'm hoping for reflective, practical, and honest, and then finally energizing. I was going to say inspiring, and then I decided that might be a high bar to set, but I will say that the people on this panel with me are people that I personally turn to for inspiration. So I'm hoping that energized is definitely a goal for the conversation. Here's how we're planning to do the flow of the panel, given this very large audience. And we're going to start after I introduce the panel in just a moment. We'll go straight into comments by each panel member, about 5 minutes each. There will be a few modifications for people's different roles, but they'll all be answering two basic questions in their 5 minutes. The first is how you see this moment in the world and in the history of your work in this movement, whatever it is they see as most important to say about that. And then what 2 or 3 strategies or actions do you see as above all important in this moment? After we've heard from everybody, I'll probably take 10, 15, 20 minutes to ask questions, to draw them into conversation with each other. During this time, please put your questions into the Q&A function on the webinar. We're going to ask you to do that rather than the chat, because on a chat with this many people, it goes past really fast. So we're going to ask you to put your questions in the Q&A function. And then we're going to turn to answering your questions. I'm hoping for a really broad range of questions, given how varied the geography and backgrounds and interests are of people on this call. And I'm going to get to as many as I can. Of course, we may not get to everyone, but we'll do our best. And then at the close, I'm going to give each panelist a chance to reflect on one action step they'd like to suggest or one takeaway that they want to leave everyone with. And I will just note that achieving that ambitious agenda with such a large audience will mean, first of all, putting your questions in the Q&A. We can't see you to see raised hands. I'm also going to be timing the panelists tightly, and I just want to say in advance that I apologize to all of them for that, because these are all people that you could easily learn from listening to them for an hour or two, but we aren't going to be able to do that in this conversation. So you'll just have to follow up and go to their websites and see the longer versions. So even with that, I know we won't get to everything. We are going to try in the chat several times during the conversation to put up the organization's websites. You can follow up, you can get on mailing lists, we can send some resources out afterwards. So now let me introduce the 4 amazing panelists. The person who'll speak first is Roshni Nedangadi. She's a founding partner and chief research officer of HIT Strategies. Their work and her specialty is lifting up, doing public opinion research that lifts up the voices of people of color, of young people, of low propensity voters. So her work finds the nuances and deepens understanding of really important communities of people. The person who'll speak second, Taifa Butler, is the president of Demos, which seeks to build a just and inclusive multiracial democracy and economy. Before coming to Demos in 2021, she spent nearly a decade at the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, which she directed since 2015. And that's where I know Taifa from first, as an incredible powerhouse in the state of Georgia. So it's wonderful to welcome her to this panel as well. Speaking third is Reverend Dr. Starsky Wilson, President and CEO of the Children's Defense Fund and the CDF Action Fund. CDF was founded in 1973, just had its 50th anniversary, and its work is to build communities so young people grow up with dignity, hope, and joy. It does that through an incredible range of strategies, which I'm sure he'll talk about. In addition, his national service includes chairing the board for Duke University's Divinity School, serving as a trustee for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and before coming to CDF, he was president and CEO of the Deaconess Foundation in St. Louis and pastored St. John's Church, also in St. Louis. And finally, Kika Matos, who'll close out the panel, is the president of the National Immigration Law Center, or NILC, and the Immigrant Justice Fund. Prior to joining NILC in 2023, she was vice president of initiatives at the Vera Institute of Justice, and she has an incredible range of experience before that as an advocate, as an organizer, as a lawyer. And one thing I didn't know, but that she and I have in common and have in common with several of you on the call, is that she also worked for local government as a deputy mayor in the city of New Haven. So we have an amazing panel, and I'm just going to go right into it in order not to hold us up. So I'm going to start with Roshni, who everyone else, we're going to have a conversation. Roshni is setting up the conversation with a few slides that she'll move through quickly. And so the question for you is, from your perspective as a pollster, deeply engaged in understanding public opinion among people of color and young people, what can you tell us that will help us ground our understanding of this moment and of strategies? Roshni?
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction, Olivia, and thank you for having me. I am sorry, I'm a pollster, so I have to show you all just a couple of slides to kind of ground us. I want to take a little step back quickly to start the conversation. We've been at Hit Strategies, we've been doing a project with the Working Families Party over the last couple of years in rethinking through how we define working class voters and what it means to be a working class voter and how we reach out to them. So I just want to ground the conversation and where I'm coming from in some of these definitions before going into some of the important racial justice, immigrant justice, and other economic justice policy issues. Um, but we did a 5,000 sample plus poll with the Working Families Party in order to cluster our multicultural working class. What we found is that 63% of registered voters fall into the working class. And we didn't define it the typical way of just income and education buckets, but we did a little bit more of a in-depth definition that also added in potential earning income and actual occupation when we were screening people into classes. And we came up with on the right side are 7 different buckets of working class voters to try and figure out who it was that we could segment out, really speak to, and understand more deeply where the working class is, where we can meet them, and how we talk to them about important policies. Hopefully, we'll be able to share this whole study with you after this webinar. It's extensive, and I'm just touching on like really the high level pieces of it, but I think it's a really interesting look into our working class, and I would highly recommend taking a look at it. Um, the big top line here is our modeled working class. We found it is more female. It is typically younger than the typical working class, and it is more diverse. There are more people of color in our modeled working class than we would see in the overall registered voter population. So some of the questions that we asked in order to segment them and in order to kind of move away from a really false choice framework that we put working class voters into, it's either this or this, it's either this or this. We wanted to take a little bit more of a nuanced view and try and find the in between with these working class voters so that we really understood where they stand. On economic fairness, we asked, enacting a nationwide jobs guarantee for all Americans, providing stable, good paying work for everyone who needs it. Do you support, somewhat oppose, or totally oppose? Our working class voters have a net 55% support for a nationwide jobs guarantee. And one of the other questions that we asked was in America today, one of our biggest problems is the lack of jobs with good pay, benefits, and opportunities for advancement. While 54% of our working class voters support this statement and believe in that, only a net 6% of our upper class actually believe in this statement. And so there are big differences that we see already emerging between the classes. One of the other questions that we asked was on open borders. So the statement that we read for them is our open borders are allowing drug gangs, terrorists, and other criminals to invade our country, threatening the safety of our communities and our national security. The classes actually overwhelmingly feel pretty much the same way about this statement, with around 30 to 40% net support between the working and upper class, which would make us think that perhaps our working class voters weren't interested in immigrant justice. However, when we ask a few other questions framed in different ways, such as through their hard work, taxes, and other contributions, most immigrants make America stronger, and most undocumented immigrants currently living in the US should be offered a path to citizenship, we see that 49% and 26% net, respectively, of our working class actually fundamentally agree with those statements. And to the point of the slides before that I was showing, our working class is much younger, much more female, much more diverse. So you would think that perhaps some of the agreement is coming from our more diverse working class voters, but we found that that's not the case. When we limit this just to white working class voters, we actually see very similar levels of agreement. So on the first statement, a net 46% agreement with the statement. On the second statement, a net 16% agreement with the statement among our white working class voters. Just one more point to touch on here in terms of racial justice. We did a survey with the YWCA on women around the country right before the election around attitudes on social and economic issues. And one of the things that stood out most was their desire for racial justice and civil rights policies. This is really a very, very brief distillation of the whole survey. But overall, women place a lot of importance on racial justice and civil rights, with 60% of our sample, so women around the country, saying that it is very important for them that we see policymakers achieve solutions that strengthen protections against hate crimes, ensure everyone has equal access to voting, and passing the equal rights amendments. Also strong support for protecting people of color from police violence, addressing racism as a public health crisis, and preventing discrimination for the LGBTQ community. So overall, I think that we have voters in this country who are very interested in economic justice, in immigrant justice, and in racial justice. We just have to figure out a little bit more how to speak to them in language that resonates with them and proves that we're all working towards the same goals and we're all on the same page. And hopefully that didn't go
Thank you
over
so
either.
much. Thank you, Roshni. And I just want to note that we'll come back to you in the Q&A because I know you've done some deep work to help us think more about how we speak and what are some of the, promising areas to focus on. Thank you very, very much. Now, Taifa, could you share in just 5 minutes how you see this moment and 2 or 3 top line strategies or actions?
Sure. Thank you, Olivia. There's so much to say, and I will start off by saying we're in a daunting, high stakes. Which side of history are you going to be on environment? I serve today as the president of Demos, and as Olivia said, come from doing work in the South for 2 decades, trying to advance equity and economic opportunity. And what we know at Demos is that you have to do this intersectional work at economic justice, democracy reform with racial justice in the center. And we're living, quite honestly, in a new gilded age where economic inequalities are inequities, I should say, are so vast that the world's wealthiest 10% earn 52% of the global income, and the poorest 50% earn just 8.5%. And so this myth, the legend of trickle-down economics still reigns supreme, even though it's been proven in a recent study of 50 years of economic policies that did not, in fact, trickle down and it has contributed to the proliferation of the economic inequality we see. And we had a moment several years ago with the recognition that racial systemic racism still exists in our country post-COVID, with the labor movement, with the disparate impact on essential workers, and the racial justice call to action after the death of George Floyd. We saw an inkling where we all agreed that systemic racism exists and it has to be addressed. And that moment has now quickly dissipated, and we see this swift white backlash. What I see, quite honestly, is very similar to a Reconstruction redemption period, where we saw white power dominance and a retraction from multiracial democracy to more of an oppressive, exclusionary period for Black, Indigenous, and non-white people in this country. And so we are at another moment where we're seeing the proliferation of anti-Black, anti-democratic, sort of inclusive policies that are really impacting people's ability to fully participate in our democracy and thrive in our economy. And I'm really, really clear that we have to have the solutions and advocacy that will build power, economic power and political power. And I can talk more about what Demos is doing in that regard. But I'm also very clear that we cannot direct service our way out of poverty or economic inequality. And I think that's a natural reaction as we are concerned about sort of the policy advocacy that is necessary to resist this authoritarian moment that we're in. And we also cannot protest alone or organize enough to our liberation. So I would just say very quickly in terms of 2 to 3 strategies that we think are really important to advance the kind of structural reforms that will build the kind of economic and political power for Black and Brown folks who are the rising electorate. They are the rising majority. We have to think about the reforms at the state level, which include pro-voter, pro-democratic policies. We have to protect against the right to protest. We have to continue to shore that right up in this environment up and ensure that we can advance more policies that will build the kind of full political participation for everyone. We have to strengthen worker rights and protections, and that goes everywhere from how do we make sure that people have an opportunity to co-govern in their workplace and the right to organize, but also have the kind of flexible leave and paid leave and other kinds of benefits that will ensure that they can support their families. And then finally, I think we have to ensure that we have the strategies that will help build an informed electorate with political education, because at the end of the day, policy will not change without political will and public will, and we can't negate one for the other. We have to work in both domains. So that's my quick take, Olivia, and we can talk more. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There was a lot there, and I really look forward to digging into it in the conversation. Starsky, same question. Could you share in just 5 minutes how you see this moment and what are 2 or 3, a handful of top-line strategies or actions?
Sure. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to share and the invitation to be a part of this remarkable group. And thanks to everyone who's joined the conversation. I'll piggyback a little bit and share how I see this moment first in context of history. So CDF's history goes to really 1969 into the Civil Rights era, where our founder and president emerita, Mary Jean Wright Edelman, understood a couple of things. Number one, the country was tiring of a conversation about race and racial justice. Number two, if you expanded the dialogue and approach to a universalist frame to talk about children and young people, you could get about 90% of the racial justice agenda done by having a broader tent with less explicit but more universal messaging to invite more people into the coalition. And then number three, you had to use the moment to build the narrative and the data-based approach for a future moment that didn't present itself immediately. So that's 1969. In a lot of ways, I think there are a lot of things that resonate in this moment. Number one, people in power have tired of a conversation about racial equity and tired of the wins that remarkable organizations like those on this call, both in the chat and on the panel, have advanced. And so having seen that make its way all the way to the front page of Time magazine and the Domestic Policy Council and the White House integrating, there was significant backlash, as has been noted. So I think some of the lessons we've got to learn are similar to the ones that we had to learn before. So first and foremost, I think we've got to be wise enough about our results to be able to use a universalist frame when necessary and to advance strategies that are about the result when not always about the label. I know that's not going to seem really popular in some settings, but I think we've got to find a way and find themes that help us to contend with the separations and divisions among people, including our people. To take very seriously some of the divisions that we see coming out of this election, we recognize that some of our organizations' base building and constituency efforts were not reflected in the choices of some of our base. And so there are ways in which we are connecting, and we need to be thoughtful about connecting differently, including messaging in large enough frames. And yes, the political education we need to do, absolutely. I've done listening sessions with people who are Freedom School parents for CDF in on the south side of Dallas near Fairground Park. And they've said some things that have offended my staff, frankly, and our sensibilities. And what we have to take for that is these are our constituents, this is our base, and we actually have to spend some more time listening and be thoughtful about how we meet in the middle through political education that is responsive and going both ways. The second thing from the historical standpoint we learned is that we as CDF began to establish state offices in 1981 and built them significantly through the mid-1990s. In the era of Reagan's neo-federalism, we recognized that our primary impact would not be here near our headquarters in Washington, D.C., but rather we needed to find a way to build a national case through cultural organizing in states that mattered, like California and New York, but also in places where we could have a national conversation, a presidential election at the time in places like Minnesota and Ohio with outsized impacts, and we could have an impact in the state level. So I think those were critical pieces for us. And the last piece, as I close here, I'll share that we've got to be focused on for us in this moment is building and thinking beyond the moment to swing big for moonshots that can't get done in 4 years to help keep our lift, our eyes set and our vision cast beyond both the White House and a looming political figure whom we've seen before. To say we've got to use 2025 and use these coming months to state and declare our intentions for things that will take much more than 4 years to build. To keep our people lifted, energized, and inspired, to use your word from earlier, Olivia, and inspired for a moment that is bigger than the White House, that is bigger than one political figure, and that allows us to see beyond this moment as well. And so we're looking for what those appropriate moonshots will be that we've been keeping in our back pocket, that we're just going to declare for the world, for everybody to call us crazy in 2025, but to try to get some people excited and energized to work beyond this administration.
Thank you very much. And I just want to note that I think although we on the panel can see Dr. Wilson because of some technical reasons, some of you watching may just see his screenshot, but you can all hear him, I think. And the powerful remarks, I think, are there for everybody. Kika, same question for you. In just 5 minutes, a little bit about your diagnosis of this moment and the headlines you'd raise. I'm already thinking about all kinds of not just agreement, but actually areas of tension that I see in the different ways we're laying it out. So that will be really interesting.
Thank you so much, Olivia, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm gonna cut to the chase because milk is very much in the belly of the beast and will be so for the next 4 years. And I want to start off with a very sobering analysis for us, which is that, and Taifa really alluded to this, which is that we're about to enter one of the most dangerous moments in our nation's history. And immigrants are going to be the first ones to be attacked. Trump's plans for immigrants is both comprehensive and horrifying. And I just want to lift some of the ones that keep me most up at night. After the inauguration, we are likely to see mass deportations. We are likely to see worksite raids. We are likely to see the establishment of internment camps that will focus on providing miserable conditions for people so that they, quote unquote, self-deport. We are likely to see efforts to repeal birthright citizenship. And in the horizon also are efforts to overturn a Supreme Court ruling called Plyler versus Doe, which was established in 1982, such that undocumented children will be denied the right to attend and to get a public school education. Those are some of the things that we're likely to see. There were some concerns about family separation because we saw them under Trump 1.0. And what we are hearing from Trump, and we heard a few days ago, his response to that is there will be no family separation. We will simply deport entire families, including US citizen children. And so for us, we are facing a parade of horribles. And the concern that we have is not just specific to immigrant communities, but it is that this, for us, we see very clearly, I see very clearly, this is also a path towards authoritarianism. And the path to authoritarianism will be created on the backs of immigrants. I will repeat that. The path to authoritarianism will be created on the backs of immigrants. They will begin with immigrants because they have done a really good job of demonizing immigrants. So it's easy to do terrible things to people that you demonize, but they will not stop there. They've already signaled that they're going to go after the trans community, particularly children, and they're going to go after women's reproductive freedoms even more than they already have. And so our analysis and our strategies are built on the realization that immigrants are going to be under attack, but our democracy is also going to be at stake. And so we have to be ready to deploy strategies that really hold those two things into consideration. Olivia, to your question about our most important strategies, I really want to lift three of them. The first is that in order for us to try to stop the worst excesses of this administration, because we have already recognized that we will see some losses, we have to create a broad-based coalition. No one organization, nor will the immigrant rights movement alone be able to stop the horror of what's about to happen. So we have to be very intentional about broadening our tent and looking for coalitions wherever we find them. The second thing is that we need to be really discerning about what we respond to, because this administration was very good the first go round at creating smoke bombs. So we all pivoted to terrible, disgusting things that were said, right? Or low-level attacks, when in fact, what we were not paying attention to were the terrible things that they were moving as we all focused on the smoke bomb. So we have to be really strategic and really discerning about what we're going to focus on. And then the last thing for us, and it will be strange to hear this from somebody who runs a legal advocacy organization, we will not be able to win just in the courts alone. We anticipate that we will be successful using the Constitution to protect and stop some of the horrors and some of the worst, most unconstitutional policies that will come our way. But it will take an entire movement, and it will take serious efforts at mobilization for us to be able to respond accordingly. And I'll stop there because I don't want to overstay my welcome. And I time myself too.
All amazing. I can't believe how much you all gave us to think about in those remarks. And I guess I want to start with a question that the juxtaposition of Starsky's and Kika's remarks really brought home to me, because I've been struggling with this a lot. There's one idea, which is long-term vision, need to lift it up. And there's another idea, which is terrible things are about to happen to people, and we have to stop those things, or at least if we can't stop them, minimize them, slow them down, get in there and tell the story. The way I think about that for CLASP is that we're pretty small. We're going to have to be in a big way on working with partners to stop harm. We're going to try to lift up, and we're going to look for ways you can lift up while stopping harm. One very quick commercial announcement. We did an amazing piece in the first Trump administration called Our Children's Fear, which told the story of the consequences of workplace raids for young kids, their caregivers, and their parents, and did that in the context of a vision of what children's lives should be like. So we were sort of trying to do both at once. But I know that all of you may be in different places given your organizations, and so I just want to throw that out. How do all of you think about the tension in a moment like this between a vision of the long term and an immediate set of things that have to happen. And we'll start with whoever would like to jump in.
I would love to go first because I think this tension is real. And having done some of the proactive visioning work in the South for years, there's this sort of tension of trying to bring people to see a vision, see themselves in a vision of economic opportunity for, 2 decades out. Whereas, especially when we're trying to organize folks on the ground and people people are having trouble keeping their lights on right now. They're, facing real economic hardship right now. And you want them to think about the next 20 years. And so I think within our ecosystem, there has to be a both and. And I know some might say it's a luxury for us to be able to think long term, who has capacity to do that. But it's also having to be able to set the vision that people can, galvanize around, see themselves in, while we also do the protection work for right now. And so I think my team at Demos is trying to do this both and of how do we not see the ground of the vision? Because I think our opponents who are diametrically opposed to equity and racial justice, and seeing an America where everyone has full political participation and we have an expanded electorate, no matter where you live, no matter what you look like, that have voice and agency to control our democracy and economy. Like, if we don't cast that vision and really do the work of changing hearts and minds, but also what are the structural reforms necessary, we will never get there. And so I just think that there has to be someone holding that piece. And it might not be all of us. We might not all have capacity to do it, but part of this ecosystem needs to, while we do the protection, the defensive, and try to get some incremental wins right now. So I just think that, like I said, we'll have to walk and chew gum at the same time. And also, I think this gives us an opportunity as an ecosystem to leverage each other's strength. And and as I think about this 2-decade shift where America is projected to be majority people of color, and we've seen 50 years of organization on the right, where they brought all the think tanks together and cobbled together a 900-page agenda, Project 25. Where is our Project 43, right? Where is our collective cobbled together vision where we know we align on many things, but we're not taking that time because we're too busy putting out the fire? So that is what I'm holding.
Yeah.
See who else would like to get in. Starsky, go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And part of what I'll say is that we've got to break down some of the artificial distinctions within what we call a sector, right? So philanthropy and nonprofits are a part of the same sector. Whether you're doing direct service, whether you're doing advocacy and organizing, you're in the same sector. The social sector should bring all of its assets and be thoughtful, and as we consider this broad-based coalition, be thoughtful that there are other sectors that need to be a part of this work, bringing their gifts, graces, and resources, assets to the table. So I say that to say there is much more, there's too much conversation, and I say it from kind of putting on board hats and talking about my former life. There's way too much conversation in a really safe element of our sector in philanthropy about anticipatory retrenchment. Pulling back from commitments to DEI, racial justice commitments, and the like, because philanthropy is afraid of what Trump might do to them, even though there are billions of dollars to protect them and to protect us. So part of what we need as an asset in this conversation, so that we can do both of these things at the same time, is the protective force of one of our least regulated aspects of social life, which is philanthropy, to stand up, protect itself, and protect the attacks on 501c3s in this moment, because of what I believe, which is that community building, which is what's required in this moment to get us to solidarity, and base building, envisioning, requires sanctuary. We actually need elements of safe space to get to this point about yielding from attacks. We need elements of safe space. We need real spaces. 30 years ago, we purchased Haley Farm because we needed a place to get away from the rest of the world, to talk about strategy for children, to talk about how we're going to build a movement to retreat from some of the people. We actually need that to work, and because resilience and resistance in the moment are connected to hope. So that's why I don't see attention in these. because I think in order to be able to withstand the tax in a real way, in a concrete way, people have to have a sense that there's something greater beyond this moment. Resist for what? I can resist or I can escape. And there are a lot of people, and I, talk to my clan, right? Talk to your people first, middle-class Black people. There are a lot of middle-class Black people with capacity to escape who are already talking about quitting America. And so that is a lack of hopefulness that is leading people to leave their people. And I trade in scripture. And so I think about those who can escaping and leaving the people who couldn't as a remnant. And there's no hope for me in that. And so we got to have a space to build solidarity. We got to create that space. And folks in philanthropy, folks in the corporate sector who are oriented around social mission have to create that space by providing both the resources and by the use and allocation of their resources, legal and otherwise, to protect and defend a space of sanctuary so that people actually can resist.
I'm going to go to Kika and Roshni in a moment. There's so much here. I know we all want to get into. I'm just going to ask everybody, I'm sure this is generating questions in your minds, the questions about philanthropy, about safe spaces, about hope and vision and immediate so anyway, please put your questions into the Q&A. I have to say that question, Starsky, about resonates for me with my own family history of when do people leave and when do they stay. And my mother said to me long ago, your grandfather didn't leave Germany till his life was in danger. But of course, the challenge is that there are going to be some people whose lives will be in danger. And so the question of how you build hope and fight back is really important. Let me go to Kika and then Roshni. I know you may not want to weigh in on action. I know as a researcher, you think a lot about the questions, but I want to go to you in a moment to see if your work offers us any insights on this vision, hope, long-term, and protect, defend in the immediate. Go ahead, Kika.
I'll be brief because I want to build on some of the comments that Taifa and Reverend Dr. Wilson have already stated. I call myself a recovering lawyer. I am at heart an organizer, and I will always be an organizer. So I think about these moments in the context of organizing, and I will say two quick things. One is, it is really easy to organize for or against something that's immediate. Right? So there's a crisis or there's an opportunity to do something and there's a time limit and people understand it and they throw themselves at it. But we cannot lose sight of our North Star, of our path to liberation, because when we do that, we are not able to comprehensively advance an agenda. And so for us in the immigration space, everything that I just mentioned are crises and they are things that we will have to fight against because they're in front of us, they're dangerous, they're frightening, and they will impact significant numbers of people. But the way that we have in the immigrant rights movement held on to this idea that we need to think about the immigration, the long-term immigration vision is in the context of an entity we stood up a few years ago called the Immigrant Movement Visioning Project, and it brings together a coalition of about 60 immigrant rights organizations. And we're very disciplined that we don't talk about what's immediately in front of us. We talk about what is the 20-year vision, what is the path to liberation, and how do we get there? And part of what that has also done is forged stronger relationships, because we're not quibbling about you should be fighting this fight in Congress, or you took the wrong policy position about this, and where the hell were you when this happened and you didn't show up for me. We're all holding on to each other and creating a vision and a path to liberation that has us looking at the long haul. And I think it is important for any movement around any issue to create that space. And if Dr. Reverend Wilson invites us to Haley Farm to have those conversations, we will happily go.
Open
I had the
invitation.
chance to be there. It's
Open
amazing.
invitation.
Okay, great. I want to add one thing to that and then go to Roshni, which is that in the spirit of honesty, I have to say that it makes total sense to me that there are ways to use the vision to unify, but that in my experience, sometimes when you're talking about a big coalition, it's easier to unify fighting back against, because people may have quite different visions of the future, right? National NILC, the organization Kika leads, and CLASP created together Protecting Immigrant Families, which now is 700 organizations in the heat of fighting back. And we had a big conversation at the beginning about how much of a big vision, either for immigrant families or for healthcare and economics and children's issues, everybody had to share at the beginning. And we decided on a low bar at the beginning because we wanted everybody to build those relationships in that fight. And so I do think there is something to be said if you're trying to build big coalitions for the way the immediate can help people move along a little bit and get a little closer to each other on the big vision. So, I think it's a complicated thing to manage. Roshni, what would you like to add that will help us think?
Yeah, I think I come at this from a different angle, from a messaging perspective. But I will say that often, especially in our coalition spaces, we're messaging the immediate fight. So we're thinking about what it is, yes or no, how can we get people to take action on one particular issue, one particular election, one particular candidate, one particular ballot initiative, and it misses a little bit of the bigger picture. We've been pushing very hard for organizations to step back and look at voters in terms of what are their values? Where can we actually connect with them and align with them and understand what those values mean in terms of how they see the world, how they see various policies affecting and connecting with those values before we ask them yes or no on certain fights. I feel like often the messaging recommendations that we see are very immediate and in the moment and can move people, move groups of people on a certain thing, but we don't take the time to connect it past the one specific issue or one specific election. And so we see, in my opinion, a very transactional electorate who has been conditioned on, if you vote for this thing, we'll give you this. If you vote for this person, we'll get this for you. And with the way that our system is currently functioning, we're just not able to deliver. So we're creating a system where we're failing voters left and right. And don't have a kind of better messaging mechanism right now to speak to them more thoroughly. So just coming from a messaging perspective here, I don't think that it's an either or, but I do think that we need to just take a step back and really dig into the groups that we want to talk to for long term and build our base with and build coalition with more deeply in order to suss out those values and make sure that we are doing long-term work to connect our positions with the values that they hold.
Thank you. I want to take a moment. There's tons more we could talk about on all of these themes. And as I say, I'm going to encourage, oh, good. We have some people starting to put questions into the Q&A. I'm going to wait for a couple more and then go to that. And let me, in the meanwhile, ask you a little bit of a question that takes us in a practical direction. One of the things that Kika highlighted in her remarks is that while there are things to be learned from past battles, like in the first Trump administration, there are also differences. I think you highlighted, Kika, the extent to which legal strategies alone may not work this time, both because of increased lawlessness that certainly the administration's been signaling as they talk about what they're going to do, and because of different people in the courts, both those things, I guess. And I think what you highlighted was that means a both and strategy that includes a lot of different things. We've been thinking about that a lot too. I'm sure everyone else has. So can I hear a little bit about, in practical terms, you've all characterized the difficulties of this moment and this environment. Any other thoughts about what that means for the kind of work that needs to happen? Actually, Dr. Wilson, you gave us one too when you said philanthropy has to commit to creating protected spaces, because the capacity to think and to strategize requires that safety. And that was kind of, I see that also as kind of an immediate practical implication of this moment. What other things would you want to add that come out of the ways this moment is different or particularly dangerous, or any other features you want to call out?
Yeah, I'll share a couple of things that I'm learning. So I'm still in student mode on this. Been in seat 4 years and here in DC and experiencing this transition. So I've been asking leaders who have been here longer, like what to be thoughtful about in this moment. So one that has come to me that I'm mindful of is the knowledge transfer in the context of the transition. Where do these remarkable leaders who have been serving in the context of this administration, advancing an agenda that's been aligned with movement, where do they go? Do they have places within think tanks, our organization? Do we have the resources to capture them? Can they be advocates now for the things that they've been building for the last 4 years? And specifically within that, one of my elders in the work told me, everybody spends their last year trying to create hooks for sustainability for the things they want to happen next. And so the question is, what are those hooks that have been left for the last 12 months that folks in this administration have been putting, and how do you connect with them? If folks are doing work around housing, and have they created opportunities for state and local governments to connect with resources once they're gone? If you are doing work around education, and the new secretary didn't really want to be over education, and she really wanted commerce. And so while people are talking about the Department of Education, there's probably some stuff over there you can do while she figures out what's going on. So speaking with folks who are transitioning, being thoughtful about what are the leave behinds that may not be as visible, that we can connect with, that are probably state and local, to continue to advance or to leverage resources that have been set for the future, are some really practical things that have been helpful to me in thinking about this moment, that I just share with others that may be helpful as you think about it as well.
Couple things. I actually think that the location for political appointees matters. I've also been giving a lot of thought to are there ways philanthropy and the nonprofit sector can provide support for career employees who are committed to following the law? Because I think I'm less optimistic than you, Dr. Wilson, about whether states and localities can do it alone, right? We're going to have to stop a lot of federal damage. And I do think in some cases, the opportunities to help people think through what the law says, have opportunities should they, about seeing their role may also matter. But that's a great idea. I'm going to let one other person in, and then I'm going to go to the questions that are starting to pile up in the Q&A. Kika, would you like to go next, or who'd like to comment next?
Sure, I can come in next with 3 quick things, and I'm going to be with Taifa's permission, sliding a little bit over into her issue area, which is, I do think that I want to lift up 3 things. One is the importance of mass mobilization in the moment that we're in. Mass mobilizations were what stopped or slowed down the Muslim ban and allowed lawyers to litigate the first go round. So not just the immigrant rights movement, but other movements need to think about how can we collectively throw down around a key set of issues. The other is, I do think there are going to be opportunities for us. We're going to be on the defensive at the federal level, but there are opportunities at the state and local level to advance pro-immigration agendas and to also create a layer of protection against the federal government. And we have to take advantage of that. And then the last thing is, I do think that we all have a responsibility to think about all of this in the context of democracy. What are the pillars of democracy that will likely be subject to erosion? What are the things that this administration will try to attack so that it's easier to slide into authoritarianism? It's not the job of demos. It's not the job of other democracy or advocacy organizations to do that. It is our collective responsibility as we do the work that we do to identify what is happening and figure out what we need to do to step up in that space and help protect our democracy.
Thank you.
Go
ahead, Taifa, and then I'll go to our questions. Go ahead.
Just to plus one on what Kika just said is that everything is democracy at the end of the day, right? And so how do we, and I, when I get a chance to talk to funders and philanthropy and those who are philanthropy adjacent, you know, what I implore is fund us like you want us to win. Right. And so what that means in terms of the multi-prong approach, we just said, Roshni said, typically organizing is transactional. Our organizing partners at the state and local level talk about how critical it is for a 365, 24/7 sort of civic engagement apparatus that keeps voters, that keeps people engaged every day, building relationships, getting them engaged in their community. And that costs money. And so when it comes time to engage people, build that kind of public will around the policy ideas that are necessary to help it have material conditions change for them, then we already have that sort of muscle and people are already at the table and they're already, you know, speaking truth to power and have an open government that really engages with them. And so there's money to be had, there's money that is needed to invest in that. But there's also the side of the house where we have to think about what are the ideas, the think tank spaces, who is ideating and bringing the policy solutions to bear, and how are we elevating the ideas that are coming from the field. And to our point, state and local governments aren't necessarily going to be able to do it alone and to stave off the kind of preemption that will happen at the federal level. But what are we doing to really ensure that the ideas from the ground are being elevated and scaled? And again, that innovation, that needs investment, as well as the policy advocacy. So, you know, with the sort of authoritarian regime that we are likely to see, and that is not new to America, it is happening globally, right? So how do we think about this in context to the globe and sort of the economic frustration and anxiety? We already learned that this election across the globe was about change, right? And so how do we think about the change and the needs of people so that the policy solutions can be real, and then that people's voices can be heard and they're building the kind of power long term. And our power agenda and our power scorecard that we just released is really about the immediate and the long term.
So we have a bunch of questions that build on the ideas that several of you have been raising about the role of philanthropy. And I'm not surprised about that because we all like to give advice to philanthropy. I've certainly been doing a lot of that lately. So let me frame two of the questions from the Q&A about philanthropy. And then I have one that I think is also a really good question that I have thoughts about, which is about organizations that have service delivery responsibilities with federal grants like Head Start and want to both provide and be advocates. So let's come back to that one second. But on philanthropy, we have both a question about how to address retrenchment by philanthropy. I would note, Taifa, that despite what you've said about democracy, a certain number of funders, I think, for a while saw that as maybe a little safer than doing racial justice or immigration. And so maybe they didn't do democracy in the deep way that you're recommending. So the question is, what do we do in response to, how do we pull philanthropy back into this work? And then just a broad question about what's helpful and what's not helpful from philanthropy in this moment. So I know everyone's going to want to speak to that. So I'm going to actually ask everyone to be brief. Roshni, I know you have some thoughts for philanthropy. Do you want to start and then we'll go to everybody else?
Yeah, and again, I'm just coming at this from a little bit of a different perspective than the other panelists, but we typically join messaging projects on the early end where we're coming up with the design for projects and coming up with the concept for what we want to talk to voters about. And I think that we often don't get the opportunity to step back and say, let's just reach out to the voters that are most important to us and find out what it is that they're thinking about and talking about and how they're framing these issues. We often see donors come in with a clear idea of how they want to message things. And I would just encourage in this new environment to take a step back and focus on perhaps a group of people rather than a specific messaging tacked on an issue, to dig in, understand what they think about things, and start with that values-based framework before moving on to a sort of prescribed message that could be really helpful moving forward.
Well, that's really interesting because I often articulate from the point of view of a nonprofit grantee a similar message, which is rather than trying to solve this problem yourself, maybe especially in a moment that really demands change and adaptability, think about the people, the ecosystem, the collaborations that you believe bring together the capacities to solve it and support them. So that's a very similar point. Thank you. Starsky, why don't you go next?
Yeah, I think framing in democracy is helpful because I think it also means for philanthropy focusing on people. And that may seem simple, except that one of the things that happened in the last 20 years is a pretty intentional shift from consumer advocacy and community organizing organizations to institutes. So choosing ideas over individuals, and philanthropy investing their solutions in research bases that aren't always directly connected to actual people. And so what I would advise is, like, if we really want to think about democracy and we think about things like economic mobility, and there are worker responses and organizing that is directly related to people that philanthropy should think more about. And I'm not saying recalibrate back. I am saying get to some level of balance for how much you're putting into institutes around ideas and versus what you're actually putting into people. Democracy is about voting, voluntarism, and voice. So how are we investing in those things, and how does that calibrate versus some of the other things that we talk about? The same kind of thing. I'm just trying to be really simple. Like, how do we make change? We want to see organized people and organized money. Understand yourself as the organized money, and try to organize people. And when I say people, I really want to think about Kika's masses, not just mass mobilization, but mass organizing. I was at a convening in the Bay not long ago, and I heard an organizer who was deeply concerned that everybody is funded to organize the organizers and nobody's organizing the people. So being thoughtful about getting even to this Head Start question, being thoughtful about who's actually having direct contact with people in whatever settings they are. Head Start operator, you can register voters and make sure that the people who you're serving actually direct service organizations can sign people up, making sure people are resourced to register to vote. Those are things that are not political activity that you can actually engage in. And I encourage more people to do it, even if you're doing direct service. Part of our fights on the federal stuff has to do with, can you actually get the benefit of legislation to people by creating access tools and the like, and those are the things that are underfunded. So I would just think about those. Like, how do we actually get to masses of people? How do we fund those who are attached to people, consumer advocacy groups, and direct service providers to do some of this messaging, and being thoughtful from a philanthropic standpoint about how we've calibrated our theories of change of one vis-a-vis the other.
Kika, and then I want to add some things. I don't remember. Taifa, you kicked this off, right, a moment ago, but okay. Kika, go ahead.
I'll be really quick. I just want to remind everybody, this is an all hands on deck moment, right? And those of us on this webinar are on the front lines of a very significant fight. And so it behooves philanthropy to not just support us, but also to protect us and to be courageous during this time. Because if they can successfully go after us, and one of the things that we at Milk have been doing is thinking through how we protect our institutions, because that is one tactic that this new administration will deploy that they didn't do the last time. Going after the 501c3 status, sending us subpoenas, and trying to destroy the organizations who are on the front lines. It will require philanthropy to step up courageously. And then the last thing I would say, to me, it's encapsulated in Pastor Martin Niemöller's poem. First, they came for the communists, and I did not speak out. They are going to come after all of us. And so it behooves all of us to protect each other and support each other.
I just want to underline a couple of those points, and then I'll go back to the questions. I mean, this is an urgent moment, and as you said, an all hands on deck moment. It's a moment for philanthropy to be thinking that the IRS 5% is a minimum, not a maximum, that it's really a time for deep, for doing everything you can. And I want to underline the protection point that I think Dr. Wilson said this earlier. Fear, it's not surprising for foundations to be afraid. This is a moment when everybody's afraid, but foundations have both more money and more lawyers than everybody else. And so being a model is really important. And I guess the last thing I would add that we haven't said explicitly is that I think this conversation has really highlighted the importance of connections and collaborations in this moment, that none of us can do this alone, whether it's connecting people on the ground to the up-to-date, the federal and state policy, connecting across issues, connecting across groups, and that in itself requires resources and is something that foundations need to resource. So I would highlight that. Let me, so we had a question about that question that I had at the beginning, which was about organizations with federal grants like Head Start, balancing providing safe and caring places and being a part of the fight. And I just want to start that one off because having been at CDF in my early career and having had the extraordinary opportunity to have the Head Start program under me when I was in the Clinton administration and create early Head Start, I just have a passionate belief. Head Start came out of the civil rights movement. It from its very beginning was about a mix of advocacy and community with service. And I think it is very complicated, and it's complicated not just for federal money. I don't know if we have anybody on this webinar who does that direct service now in Florida or Texas with their anti-immigrant laws intended to frighten people who are providing services to mixed status families. And I would just urge that from our perspective at CLASP, I expect it's true at CDF and at others, we are very eager to talk with people in more detail about what kinds of strategies might be available to you. Because I think that connection between services and advocacy is a really important one, and figuring out how to do that in a way that is legal and secure really matters. So I don't know if anybody else has more specific advice, but mine would basically be reach out to a state or national partner and start to talk about it. Okay, so starting with that. And then we have a question about, and I'm just going to alert one of my colleagues that we're maybe in 5 minutes or so, we can put up our second poll, which is we're going to try to learn more about how ready you're feeling for action at this moment, so we can focus a few more questions on that. So there's a question here about threats to the social safety net and strategies state level entities can engage in to protect the most vulnerable communities. And I want to make a comment or two and then go to everybody else. I think we're expecting both legislative and administrative threats to the safety net, to Medicaid perhaps first, cuts at the national level that would trigger cuts at the state level, administrative efforts to enable states that want to do bad things to do them, and perhaps attacks that may or may not be strictly within the law on blue states or states that are trying to do good things. And I think, again, there's going to be a lot of need for collaboration because states may often be the first source of information on what exactly is happening. And it'll be both about slowing down the damage and about, or stopping it, and perhaps in some cases, but it'll also be about sticking together. And to go back to something I think several people said before, we can't be in a world where early childhood advocates think so long as we protect Head Start, we're all set. That's not going to be true if children's families are being deported and they're losing health care and Medicaid. So the ability to connect is going to be really important too. Who else would like to add on the safety net question?
I will just add that I know the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is up for reauthorization. And this is an incredible opportunity for us to ensure everyday folks understand what's at risk with a potential renewal, additional corporate tax cuts that were the corporations and the wealthy were the huge beneficiaries of the most recent tax bill. And so being able to sort of connect these cuts to the livelihood of everyday folks who rely on public goods in our government, you know, from not only the safety net, but just quality of life, right? And education and all the other things. So what I've learned over the last few years, especially people who've done the polling work, is the most unpopular moment after the January 6th event was the tax cuts passage 4 years ago. And so how do we ensure this moment that we're making sure people are aware, they're understanding the tax cuts for the rich are what will decimate, you know, the public goods like Medicaid, healthcare, and all these other goods. So I think that's the political education part that's going to be really, really important. And I think along with Project 25 and Agenda 47 and all the other things that are really about dismantling government as we know it, particularly some of these huge departments that are directly sort of providing material support to families, that people need to understand what's at stake there as well. And for those who are doing direct services, I would say again, and I think Olivia, you mentioned this, and maybe Dr. Wilson did too, is how do you organize your constituents, those families that you're providing services to, so that they're informed about the policy issues, and then have ways to connect and civically engage as these big conversations are happening at the state level.
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to add? Oh, Dr. Wilson, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just say, in this last cycle, one of the things that happened, a lot of people talk over the course of the last number of years about the Minnesota miracle, the things that were done for children and families expanding. I want to point to what I'm now calling, I've dubbed this, I'm going to trademark it, the Missouri mystery. And the same ballot where a share for the president who won in a very red state grew to 19%. So he won by 19%, and a candidate running for Senate who was made famous on January 6th for holding up his fist in the air in a white power move, won. There was also a passage of a minimum wage increase, and there was also a passage on ballot initiative of a family leave policy, and there was also a passage of a reproductive justice amendment. And so I say there's something to learn about focusing on the people and grassroots work there. And I'll point to two really active organizations there. One, Action St. Louis, based in the St. Louis area, grassroots, door-to-door advocacy organization, organizing Black and brown people primarily throughout the state, bottom line, a lot of the activity around those ballot initiatives throughout the state by basic door-to-door investment. An organization just 10 years old, born out of the Ferguson uprising. So grassroots, touching the people, still works at a local and a state level when focused on issues that impact people, even when when there's not alignment on the candidates. And on the other side of that, I point to Kids Win Missouri, a statewide multi-issue children's advocacy organization that's been working under Republican governors and a very red legislature to expand and win an Office of Early Childhood, to set up parent councils that were required in legislation they were able to get passed, but the parent councils informed by their organizing and development of early childhood fellows among people who are impacted. So all the conversation is generally impacted by folks who are directly supported or challenged by the legislation. So state level entities can engage in this kind of work, both to protect in difficult environments and frankly to win. But all of it started with grassroots organizing, training, and development of directly impacted people. And I think that's part of the lesson for the go forward as well.
And I think for me, the challenge on the state strategy, particularly when philanthropy wants wins out of it, is that it tends to leave out the South, which is an enormous share of American children and an even larger share of children of color. And so I think the state strategy has to be also conceived of as defensive, right? And we do a lot of work. I know Taifa when she was in Georgia, but there's all of our groups, I think, or at least most of us, work a lot with coalitions and partners in the South. And it is incredibly important, and it's going to be a very long haul and require deep philanthropic investment for many, 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 many years. Kika, were you trying to get in there? No. Okay. So I'm going to ask, I'm going to go back to one more question, but in the meanwhile, Nick, can I ask you to put up our poll that we want to do? Great. So we've put this up, and maybe you can answer it while we're talking about one more question. We're curious to see where people feel in terms of action. And for those of you who would like to feel more prepared than you do, if that leads you to a question of something our panelists could close with, to tell us more that would help you feel prepared, please add that question in the Q&A. Okay, so I'm going to give people a few moments to do this. And in the meanwhile, I'm going to ask for the one more question that we have right now, which is to help us a little bit with how you talk about democracy. And the question is sort of focused on, does that, what would be a definition of democracy that works for a wide range of people, that works for people with lower incomes or people with who may have a set of immediate urgent needs. And I think everybody here has reflections on that. And Roshni, if it's okay, I'm going to start with you because I know you've thought about that in several of your polling efforts.
Yes, actually, we've been engaged in an almost more than 4-year project now with the Research Collaborative on democracy reform, and in the wake of 2020 post-election vote counting and January 6th, how we talk to folks about the threats to democracy that Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans pose. And one of the themes that we see pretty consistently throughout all of our work is that talking to voters directly about democracy and the concept of democracy and the idea of democracy just doesn't work right now. And that is for a number of reasons, but a lot because, particularly when we talk to voters of color, they will tell us over and over again that this democracy doesn't work for them. So why should they work to protect it? One of the ways that we've kind of bypassed this is change our language from protecting democracy to fixing democracy. Like, let's repair and fix this democracy so that it works for people like us. That brings people a little bit more on board with what we're trying to talk about. But I think that when we're trying to reach out to voters and we're talking about democracy, it is better to think about it in terms of the concepts that we want to resonate with them, and about the long-term effects that democracy will have on them and on their communities, rather than frame the messaging as something that voters should do to protect democracy or fix democracy, or even just use the term democracy in the messaging that we're using.
Just quickly, you told me one other thing when we were talking that I think is relevant to this conversation, which is some polling you did about attitudes to trans people, which really suggested a role for community. In other words, it's not the same idea as democracy, but the idea that freedom to be yourself, which is another thing we sometimes mean when we're talking about opposing authoritarian government, and another way of talking about it, that really resonated for people. Could you just say a couple words about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we just a couple of months ago did a poll of Black folks in the country because we were approached by a client who knew that when we were talking about anti-transgender messaging, it was typically Black voters who were the most held most anti-transgender views in the way that messaging was being presented to the community. And what we found actually was that if we took a step back again and started with values, like Olivia was saying, of equality and fairness, and sort of framed the issue actually in the same way that we've been framing the abortion access fight, which is that this is not the government's business to decide who people are and what people can do with their own lives. Actually, Black folks in the country were incredibly supportive of this and didn't start from a place of didn't start from the anti-stance, started in a much more neutral middle stance where they were being taken to the other side by harmful rhetoric, but didn't start there. Even after this very tense election cycle, we probably put this poll in the field in the middle of October, and the results were still that overwhelmingly Black folks around the country came to this issue in a neutral way. So framing it, like Olivia said, as more of an idea of freedom for yourself, for your families, for your communities, freedom for people to do what is best for them, what is best for their families. It is a really compelling framework there.
Thank you. Why don't we take a quick look at the poll and see where people are in their readiness for action? Nick, can you show it to us? Well, that's interesting. I was expecting many more down on I'm not sure. So I'm going to take this as suggesting that at least for those who weighed in, the passion and energy of this group has I'm the very prepared people I'm in awe of. I'm not sure how any of us, given what we're facing, could be more than somewhat. So I'm really impressed. But that's great news that people are feeling somewhat energized at this point. I think what I'm going to do, we have 7 minutes left. We've gotten an incredible amount in. You've all been incredibly crisp and focused. I think I'm going to give everyone a last chance to comment. And we do have, I know we have another question, which is about state and federal advocates partnering, which I just want to do a commercial announcement to that person in the follow-up with CLASP's website. We've got a lot of plans about that. But let me just say, I'll go to everybody for just briefly one action step you want to recommend to people on the call, or one takeaway if action step doesn't feel right. And I think I'm going to do the reverse order to how I did the beginning. So that means starting with Kika. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Olivia, and I'll be really brief. I have less of a prescriptive action step and more of an encouragement for people to throw down for the next 4 years, to give it everything we have, to mobilize locally, mobilize at the state level, show up for the fight, and to think about what we need to do immediately, but also to prepare for that longer term vision that we are all so desperately yearning for. And I hope to see you all in the fight for immigrant rights and the broader social justice fight.
Thank you so much. And I am going to say thank you to all our panelists in a moment, but just to note, for those of you who don't know all 4 of the organizations and need to connect, we're going to make sure in our follow-up note that we provide that to you. Starsky, I think you're next.
Sure. If you're not paying attention to the weather report over my left shoulder, you see it's a dark day for democracy in DC. And it just turned that way at 2 o'clock. What I'll say on this thought project that you gave us on defining democracy differently is this. I want to say that democracy is the project of building better communities for our children by volunteering, voting, and lifting our voices. And so what I'll add as prescriptive action in this moment is that it's not about government. It's actually not about DC. It's actually about what we do together in community. And so my prescriptive action would be to join something. If it is about a voluntary society, an association, a place where you can mobilize with people, every person needs a political home. I used to tell people when I was pastoring, your church needs a political home. So your church needs to organize with other churches, synagogues, mosques, and temples. We actually need to be engaging a broader infrastructure for a robust democracy that is not governmentally dependent, but is really informed by the mobilization of our collective voices. So my commitment and my invitation is for folks to make sure that they have a political home that is more than party, but people where they find kin and impact the environments around them.
Thank you. That's a very powerful message. Taifa?
Thank you. I want to just give note to this great piece of work that Protect Democracy did on the authoritarian playbook, if any of you haven't checked it out. But the core areas that they talk about, the tactics that are included, are politicizing independent institutions, spreading disinformation, aggrandizing executive power, squashing dissent, scapegoating vulnerable communities, corrupting elections, and stoking violence. And so I just wanted to name that because when I think about the work of Ibram Kendi around being an anti-racist, one of the things he said, and it holds with me, is there is no sideline to the struggle of doing this work going forward. And so to Kika's point, like, we all have a role to play. And as you all think about whether it's within your organization, you as a community stakeholder, how do you engage and get involved? But we all have to keep our eye on the North Star, but also think about what are the ways that we can leverage our talents, our resources, our skills and expertise to really ensure that it's, again, democracy is I heard in a conference last week, it's not fixed and it's not broken. And I might have a contention there, but ultimately, government is about rule of the people and the people having the agency and control over this apparatus that governs. And so to me, it's how do we rewrite the rules so that the people rule, and how do we build the kind of economic and political power that people do have agency and voice. And right now, our systems are broken, corporations have an outsized influence. And so we have to think about centering people, particularly Black and Brown people, as we talk about racial justice. And I think that's really important. And so the last thing I'll say, Olivia, is we just launched a Power Scorecard, power.demos.org. And if you at least want to go and do research, we rank every state in terms of its ability to provide the kind of agency and control for the people in the economy and in our democracy. Go check that out, look at where your state ranks, and then figure out how to engage.
Thank you. Roshni, close us out, and then I'll say some thank yous at the end.
Sure. I don't think I have anything very new to add, so I'll just be brief. But I think after we've done the work of protecting people, which is going to be a lot of work over the next few years, it's going to be really important to invest in figuring out how we reconnect with these voters and talking to people about what's important to them and how we get them back in our coalition. And in order to do that, focusing on specific communities, groups of people of color, marginalized communities who are going to be completely beat down over the next few years, and ask them what they want out of what we're doing, out of government, out of the programs that we're pursuing, and talk to them from that lens.
Thank you. I think I'm just going to close by saying that this has been an extraordinary conversation. Speaking as someone who's invested my career a lot in national, state, local government, as well as advocacy, and in the belief that we really can collectively have public policies that work for all of us, and that the best examples over our history all do that. I am moved by this extraordinary group of leaders. And I guess the only last thing I would say is that as I think about those goals I set out, reflection, practical, honesty, and energize, I feel them all. I'm going to be thinking for a while about some of the ideas about how safety and coalition and partnership allow us to be creative in a moment that will demand both urgency and creativity, which are hard to do together. So let me ask you to give a thank you, if you're still on, to this amazing panel. Thank you all for being with us. Thank you to everybody who was on. Thank you to the amazing group that did that put this together. I just want to highlight the incredible CLASP team: Annie Hughes, Eddie Martin, Megan Gall, Tom Salyers. I'm missing somebody, Nia Ray, Nick. You were all amazing. Thank you for all the warm notes in the chat, and we will follow up with lots more information for how to make sure you can stay connected to all of us. Thank you so much. Take care.